Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a very accomplished professional from Los Angeles, USA, Rúna Bouius. Rúna, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Rúna is the founder of True Power Institute, a conscious leadership guide. She's a leadership coach, speaker, author, and a mastermind convener. So, Rúna, before we talk about True Power and coaching, tell me about your own amazing journey.
Well, I wasn't born in Los Angeles. I was actually born in Iceland.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I started my career as a very early person, and a very young person. I accidentally became an entrepreneur and founded a company, import in the field of cosmetics and perfumes.
Mm-hmm.
So I was importing products from all over the world, but particularly from Paris, France, where most of the big brands are.
Yeah.
And so I was very passionate about this, and I stayed in this business for 20 years. I also opened a retail store in the heart of Reykjavik during this time. And so for 20 years, that was my career in Iceland. And then until it was no more.
Amazing. Amazing. So let's talk about the True Power Institute. Tell me a little bit about the Institute and its mission.
Right. Well, I am passionate about the changes that are happening in the world, where humanity is going, the evolution of humanity and us as humans. And I found that, I've been focusing on leadership, but I also found that the topic of power is really, really important because it goes hand in hand with leadership. And I founded the True Power Institute in a way to evolve humanity's relationship to power, because we have such a I would say unhealthy relationship to power. We either fear it, or we seek it, or we misuse it. And for thousands of years, it has been something that has been making life for many people very difficult. Where we could say in the patriarchal system, where it was command and control, there were few people at the top that were commanding others to do what they wanted. And I feel that what's happening now, even though we don't see it fully, I think we are evolving towards a very different type of leadership system, which is going to be much more egalitarian, much more distributed power. But in order to be able to do that, we need to have leaders who understand the importance of this and are willing to give up the so-called external power in order to help their people to get empowered in a way from the inside out. So I'm kind of playing with the word power, which is, we look at it as external, and then I add true power, because then I'm going more into a different aspect of power, which is the internal power.
Very interesting.
The hidden power that we all have.
So can you also explain the concept of true power and its importance in personal and professional growth?
Yes, I really feel that if you are a leader today, or you are an aspiring leader, an emerging leader, it's really, really important to understand that there is a whole leader within you that needs to be cultivated and strengthened in order to be able to lead in a relevant way in these new times that we are in. So that's where the power comes in. It's literally, mostly we have been using our mind to make decisions and communicate, and now we use data as well. We use data in our mind. That's the main thing we use. But we have a lot of other intelligences. We are multidimensional beings, and we need to start tapping into the other aspects of our psyche. And that also means connecting to what I call soul. People call it different names, and then as well as spirit. And so what I'm proposing is that instead of always focusing externally, making decisions from external resources or guidance only. We start to come inside of us and start creating a relationship with our soul and with source, and tame our ego. And we hear a lot of talk about ego these days, ego in leadership, toxic leadership, because people are coming from their ego. And as you know, in spiritual traditions, there are many schools of what to do with the ego, and some schools, some traditions, they literally want to kill the ego. They call it the false self. I am not of that school. I look at the ego as part of us, it's our personality structure that we need as a tool to implement in a way the purpose of the soul. And therefore, but as we grow up as young people, we usually get some kind of wounding. It seems to be absolutely no exception from that. We come out of childhood with some kind of wounding, beliefs and concepts and habits that we think is real, that we use to protect ourselves, because we have misunderstood some situations, thinking that we are being threatened. So we have created this armor around us and this, in a way, security system, which the ego is taking. The ego is a security guard. But we need to start looking at the harm that these behavior that the ego shows up with is doing in the way we affect other people. So what I talk about is, I call it the wounded ego instead of the false ego. And I want us to see and start really helping that little ego to get healed from and let go of the limited beliefs and habits that literally is a story that we have told ourselves but doesn't have any truth in reality. So I want really, I'm proposing creating a relationship between the personality, the ego, and the soul, so they can start working together towards manifesting the purpose that the soul came in here to do. And in so doing, tapping into some higher power that we could call God or Allah or spirit, or source, or big mind. There's so many different names.
And, when you talk about helping individuals to identify their true power and overcome their limiting beliefs, can you give me an example of how you help them?
Yes, I go to the topic of identity, because when we are in ego behavior, the wounded ego, we are identifying as the ego. We think that is who we are. In fact, that's not who we are. It's an illusion, and we have bought into being separated from all that is. And so what I propose to people is that they start looking at the three big questions that philosophers have asked for thousands of years. Who am I? Why am I here? What is my purpose?
Correct.
And that starts to reveal when you realize, yes, I am a CEO, or I am a wife, or I am a entrepreneur, but that's a role that you've taken on. But is that truly who you are? And as they start drilling deeper and deeper and deeper, they start to realize that there is something within them that is always there, that has nothing to do with external roles. And so that's the beginning of having a relationship with the soul.
Correct.
Yeah.
And is there some element of an imposter syndrome also when you talk of ego, when you talk of the power that people are trying to wield for themselves?
Absolutely. Well, one of the things that the ego does is tell us that we are not good enough, keep us in doubt. The ego is really fed from fear. So when we think we are not good enough for something or someone, we are in fear of being rejected.
Right.
And so that creates an imposter syndrome. And there is no human being that doesn't go through periods of this. And the idea is to help individuals to heal this, to understand that they are good enough, that they are enough just the way they are.
Correct.
And that they have all these beautiful gifts and talents that they might not even know of, latent within themselves. And part of the work is really to help them to unleash that potential so they can express more fully who they truly are.
Correct.
And we sometimes refer to that as expressing your true self.
Correct. Well said. Great response. And Rúna, what are some of the common challenges people face when they're trying to harness their true power, and how can they overcome them?
Well, that is what we talked about. It's the ego. The culprit is always the ego, and based on fear. And we see that through resistance. Resistance can show up in many different ways. We could be procrastinating. We could be blaming others for something that we are resisting. Change is something we live with. Change is constant, and we are actually in a period of exponential change. And change creates a lot of fear and a lot of ego behavior, and we can see that as we are trying to combat climate issues and other things, that there's so much resistance to this. And so how do we work with resistance? We first have to realize that there is resistance. We have to cultivate awareness.
Correct.
And
so basically,
then
what I'm hearing you say is that in order to be able to determine our own true power, you need a lot of self-introspection.
Yes.
And understand your own self and give up your own ego.
Yes. I would say the way I think about it, not giving up my own ego, but heal it from its wounding and then strengthen it so it can be a sharp tool for me to be out in the world and be of service and have positive impact. But for that, I need confidence.
Correct.
I can't be dealing with imposter syndrome if I'm supposed to be doing the work of the soul in the physical form. So that's why it's important to heal the ego and then create that partnership between the ego and the soul, where the directions are coming from the soul, and then the manifestation in the physical is coming from the ego.
So, based on everything you've told me about true power, I wanted to ask you, how important is the role of a mentor or a coach in a person's journey towards achieving their true power?
Oh, huge. I would not be here today if I hadn't had mentors. And I feel so blessed to have had more than one and more than two, and teachers from different traditions and different background. So that has given me a broad way of looking at things. I've had a teacher that uses nature as a teacher. And so I would say, if you are a young person, a young leader, you are interested to be the best leader you possibly can, so you can be of service, I would say find a mentor.
Right.
Find a mentor. And I know that many companies, organizations are more and more understanding the importance of mentoring and coaching, but sometimes it is not there. So look for whatever. And thankfully, we have the internet. So there's so much interviews, like you interview people, very interesting people, so we can learn in many different ways. But if you have the ability to have a mentor, I would recommend that.
Well said. So, Rúna, let's talk a little bit about your journey as a coach. My first question is, given that you started as an entrepreneur from Iceland and have now moved and are now doing work in the area of true power, how has your background supported your own coaching philosophy, your style, and your values?
I think the 20 years that I was an entrepreneur in Iceland, I was, in those days, the term coaching wasn't widely available. But what I realized afterwards, that first I started as a one-man show, and then I had to start hiring people. And I mean, I was very young. I was in my early 20s in the very beginning. But innately, somehow, I had the sense that it was important to to train and teach and coach my people. And that was just a part of how I run my company. I was always looking at helping my people to grow and become the best that they could be. And, so in a way, that's kind of my coaching training. That I did that with my people. I also noticed as I would get, say, visitors from Paris that came from the suppliers, they came to work with us, and I would take them out for dinner. That the coaching kept on, even though we didn't call it coaching. That for some reason there was a part of just my psyche, how I am made, that I like to talk about personal growth and development, and I like to share with people from my own experience, and that's actually been helpful to many clients to know that I have been in business myself. That situations that they are encountering are often situations that I have encountered myself.
Very interesting.
So I take direct experience into the coaching.
And my next question is that, most of us in our lives have people who influence us, who we look up to.
Yeah.
So my question is, how have you been shaped by people in your life, and how are they influencing you as a coach today?
It's interesting that those people are not coming so much from my earlier years as a young person, but there is one person though, while I was an entrepreneur, that came into my life that did influence me, and that was my late husband. I married a Dutchman. He was older than me. He was a businessman in the same industry that I was in, so he had a lot of experience. He was living in Sweden when we met, running one of the biggest companies in Sweden at that time in the cosmetic industry. And I visited his company, and I spoke to the people that had worked for him for decades. And I learned about how he was as a leader. And what I understand today, even though I didn't understand it at the time, was that he is what I call a conscious leader, because he really, really cared about his people. He was a brilliant businessman. They were making great business, good profit, but he really took care of his people and took care of all the stakeholders, all the people he was working with in his community, as well as his suppliers. So I would say he was one of the first mentors, we could say, in the business industry. I learned mostly by just doing in my earlier years, but he became kind of an inspiration to me. And then after I moved to the US, after I sold my businesses, I would say my teachers have been the people that have really inspired me and kind of developed my own philosophy. So I take different ideas and different elements from what I learned from them and put it together into, I call it, taking it through my own mill. And then that's what I go to for my own philosophy. And one of these teachers is a Native American person, Canadian Mohawk, who has been living in Chiapas, Mexico for many years. She has been very influential, we could say, on my philosophy and my way of, in a way, seeing leadership and my passion for being part of this midwiving of this new business paradigm that I believe we are going into. And then my teacher that took us out into nature, John Milton, he opened up so many doors for me to understand the power of nature and that if we humans imitate nature, we are on the right track.
Well
but
said.
We haven't been very wise
I know.
far to do that. But
Absolutely.
there is so much in nature that we can learn from.
Correct.
And then I had a mentor who is a psychologist. Also, he runs a shamanic school. And then I studied, trained in yoga, qigong, tai chi, meditation. So all these different elements have kind of come together into how I conduct my own life first and foremost, and then what I share with my clients.
Well said. So, Rúna, I have time for two more questions.
Okay.
I wanted to ask you about your book. So tell me a little bit about your book.
Well, it's not a book that is my own, but I participated in creating a book called The Successful Mind, where a number of experts came together and each one wrote a chapter about the mind. And so my chapter goes into really describing how the mind works. And of course, we had to talk about the ego there and the importance of dealing with the fear and the resistance. And also, I really start the chapter with talking about the importance of redefining our definition of success. Because I think so many people spend their life tracing fame and fortune and possessions and status, and finding that they are not being fulfilled and they're not happy and not joyful and they don't understand why.
Very interesting.
So that's one of the things I always do with new clients, to have them redefine what success means to them today. And then as we go through the work and they start redefining their values or upgrading their values and looking at their identity and other aspects of their personality, when we have come to the end of the process, I ask them again, what is your definition of success today?
Well said.
And usually it has matured.
Well said. And Rúna, my last question to you, and this is for the many, many people who will listen to our conversation, based on your own amazing journey, and everything that you know about ego and about the mind, and now as a coach, what would you say are 3 lessons you would want a lot of our young viewers and listeners to take away from your journey and from our conversation?
Yeah, I think the first thing that comes to mind is be curious. Thankfully, I have a very curious mind, and I probably wouldn't have moved to the US if I hadn't been as curious as I am. So being curious just takes you away from even ego behavior. If when you start to be aware of how you are behaving and that it's coming from your woundedness, be curious about that and talk to your ego even and say, what do you need? What how do you need to be heard? How do you need to be seen? So be curious about yourself first and foremost, but also be curious about other people.
Right. Well,
because we are so different and we learn so much from each other and from different cultures. So that's definitely one aspect. The second thing that comes to my mind is, please understand that you are so much more powerful than you think you are. You have all this hidden power within you that is ready for you to activate if you so choose. But it is you have a choice. You can do it, or you cannot do it. But I would recommend that you do it. And maybe the third one is just kind of start to cultivate your own inner guidance system, your own inner wisdom and own inner intuition. So you have, when you are making decisions and navigating life, that you are not just going on data and the mind, because the mind is so tricky. We need to listen to the heart, the whispers of the heart. And we also need to listen to the wisdom of the body to help us make informed decisions for our own well-being.
Very, very interesting. And Rúna, on that note, and your 3 wonderful lessons: be curious. Second, you said you are more powerful than you think you are, so understand your own self. And third one you said, which is so very interesting, start to activate your own inner guidance system. I would also say, start to recognize your own gut feeling and start respecting what you think about yourself and what your own feelings are. Thank you so much for talking to me about your own journey. Thank you for talking to me about true power, about ego, about coaching. Thank you for speaking to me, and good luck.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the brand called You.